Welcome and thank you for joining us for our webinar today about the keys to writing a winning college essay. My name is Ashley Smith. I'm the marketing director at Scoir, and I am joined by Peter Van Buskirk, who will be sharing some great tips about the college essay, how to get started, and much more. Welcome back, Peter.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Ashley.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And this past weekend was the unofficial kickoff to summer, which is usually the time when rising seniors are starting to think about their college essays. But 2020 has already come with some life-altering events, to say the least, and it's on the top of mind for most people, and rising seniors are no exception to that. So that said, I'm curious, based on the topic that we'll be discussing today, but how important are essays in a year like this?
Good question. And frankly, essays are always important in any year, but this year in particular, given the fact that there's some real question about the students' ability to have full access to the array of testing opportunities, given the fact that the second half of the junior year was kind of cut off by the coronavirus, it will put more of an emphasis then on the subjective parts of the application as admission officers try to get a sense of the candidates. So I think it would be helpful maybe to before we get into the essay, just to review with the folks who are listening the holistic admission process to help put this into some perspective. Historically, admission officers would tell you that the best predictor of a student's success in college will be the student's coursework in high school. And in particular, admission officers want to see how you've used the curriculum available at your school to grow each year, to step up, to find new challenges, to push forward. So that will be the case even in coronavirus. We can see the progression of coursework as evidenced by the transcript that's presented for you. The grades then show that you've been able to perform at a reasonably high level in those particular courses. So again, the problem this year is that for many of the students who are rising into the senior year, the second half of the junior year will have a rather interesting grade pattern in evidence. Many schools will show pass, no pass, or pass, fail, as opposed to providing letter grades or number grades. So that, again, is going to be a bit of a compromise on the evaluation process. The test scores we mentioned, with the cancellation of a lot of test dates, means that the kids who would normally have been able to take as many as 3 different tests with the SAT or the ACT may not be able to do that, and won't be able to provide as robust a testing profile as they would like. The students' activities and achievements then are important, because admission officers will look at a good candidate, a candidate who provides strong courses, good grades, substantial test scores, and then they'll say, well, we know we have a good student here. If we admit her, what do we get? So the activities and achievements become important, and that again is going to be an interesting question this year, because a lot of the things the students would normally do with sports, music, theater, camps, that all of those things have been curtailed by the coronavirus, and so there's going to be more emphasis being placed on other areas of information. Letters of recommendation are very helpful, because admission officers want to hear from teachers about how students have performed in academic settings. So the teacher letters of recommendation, and we can talk about that at another time, give us real insight into the student's capacity to perform at a higher level. Same with interviews. When a student has an opportunity to interview with a paid admission staff person at a college or university, you got to do it, because that person's a decision maker, and that's where you can make the personal pitch. So in the holistic process, you can see how we're triangulating on the candidate from a lot of different angles. And when you consider that the first 4 items listed here are just not going to quite be the same this last year because of the coronavirus event and the shelter-in-place event, there's going to be much more emphasis being placed on the subjective parts of the application, letters of recommendation, interviews, and of course, essays. So the essay is the one thing the student can do now to affect his chances of admission. You can't go back and change courses, can't change grades. You're going to live with the test scores you have unless you're able to apply to a test optional school. But the essay is that one opportunity that you have to make the case for yourself right now. So this year in particular, the essay stands out with having even a greater importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that this is something that can be somewhat daunting for a lot of students, but can you give us some insight in terms of how helpful can this essay be overall to help supplement with some of these other things, especially in a year like this? And can you also give us some insight into what admissions officers are looking for in an essay?
Sure. The essay can accomplish a lot of things from the point of view of the reader of the application. For example, when an admission officer looks at an essay, we want to determine your ability to write well. And this is a fundamental piece. There's no other place in the application where we can get a sense of your written abilities. And many educators believe that your ability to communicate ideas is reflective of your ability to have have those ideas and think critically about them. So the writing piece is really important. We want to see if you can think critically and reflectively. Now, looking at this one in particular, I just want to make the observation that a lot of times professors will say to admission officers, bring us students who can think and who can write. We don't want to have to teach them how to think and write. We want to teach them how to analyze critically and that sort of a thing. So if a student is struggling with the technical aspects of writing, going into a college environment, that's going to be really problematic. So we want to see that you can write well. We want to see that you can think critically and reflectively. We want to see if you're able to be creative. And this is sort of going out of the box a little bit. Do you see the world in shades of gray or in black and white? Are you able to finally take risks, to imagine things that perhaps aren't always as they would seem? So the risk taking is really important, because admission officers are trying to discern your capacity to rise to the next level of challenge. And students who are confident risk takers project themselves to a higher degree of confidence and performance in more rigorous environments in college. So when you look at the combination of factors here, the essay, again, is not just a matter of putting forth a document that shows that technically you can write, but it really gives the reader some insight into how you think and how you project yourself as a critical thinker in a potential classroom situation. Beyond that, then colleges also see the essay as a window into your character and personality. Think about it. Your application will reflect a lot of things about you: courses, grades, scores, extracurricular activities, achievements. You'll be able to reveal what you've done, where you've been, who you know. All the facts of your life are there. But the essay gives the reader some greater insight into who you are, what is important to you, what do you want to accomplish, and how can you best accomplish this. And I just want to pause on this for a second, because we talked in an earlier session about having a sense of purpose, and this is where your sense of purpose begins to emerge. If your essay doesn't convey a sense of orientation to particular ideas into the future, then and show a connectedness with the institution, you may not be presenting a statement that is going to be effective. Now, I want to also, before I move on here, I want to comment that there will be different types of essays that you need to write. There's typically the main essay, or some people would call it the common application or the coalition application essay, that's 650 words in length. And that's an essay that gives you an opportunity to open yourself up to the reader about who you are and what is important to you. But the other essays that kind of fit into this particular statement about what you want to accomplish and how might you best accomplish it are going to be the supplemental essays that many schools will ask that you submit, that respond to the question that sounds like this: so why do you want to come here? Tell us what you want to study and why. Mm-hmm. Those essays are not intended to test your knowledge of the institutional superlatives, but rather they're really pushing to see whether you have a well-formed sense of purpose. Is there intentionality in your decision to apply? And how does that sense of purpose connect with what they have to offer? So that's really important with many of the supplemental essays that you're going to write. And then finally, along those same lines, they want to see, why have you identified that place? Of all the colleges or universities to which you might have applied, why have you chosen to apply at that particular institution? So again, the sense of purpose is revealed in the way you present yourself. So that's why, and I find myself talking about the need with the essays to kind of create a thematically cohesive presentation. You want to eliminate the randomness of the facts and the impressions that you put forward. And you want things to kind of knit together to create a clear sense of who you are and to reveal that sense of purpose that would be very important to the institution.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those are great points, and the holistic approach, I think, is really important to continue to point out, because it does paint a picture fully of who you are. But given the importance of this one component, is there a perfect or magic topic that students can or should choose? And how would they get started with that?
Well, first things first, choosing the topic is a real challenge. And I often have conversations late in the summer with students about their essays. How are you doing? Oh, okay. I'm still trying to figure out which essay prompt to use. And I'm thinking to myself, no, you're getting stuck on something that shouldn't be an issue at all. And just a matter of background here, the Common Application Coalition application will provide a series of prompts that students might choose to respond to in writing their essay. And because young people are accustomed to responding in an academic setting where on a particular test, an essay test, the teacher says, choose from among the following and write a 200-word essay, and they're going to be graded on. Well, this is a different kind of prompt opportunity. The prompts that are being offered are not requirements. They are suggestions. They're designed to kind of get the creative juices flowing. My suggestion to a student is ignore the prompts. Seriously, ignore the prompts because they're not required. And further, I would strongly urge students to consider a topic or an approach to an essay that allows them to tell their story most effectively. And with the thought being that whatever you choose to do with your essay, then whatever story you choose to tell will be fine, because especially with the Common Application, one of the essay prompts is this: write an essay on a topic of your choice. Well, you can satisfy the prompt there simply by writing whatever you want. So I think that one of the things that I need to get students to do right off the bat is stop thinking about the prompt and more about what it is you want to convey. What is the message that you want the admission officers to understand about you?
Yeah. And how would you recommend, or what would you suggest in order for a student to help set themselves apart as part of that process and not fall into the trap of, thinking they have to write about the prompt or whatever it may be? What's that piece of advice you would give them to really help them stand out in this process?
Well, I would just step back and say to the student, you know yourself by the facts of your life. Again,
Mm-hmm.
the resume, the things you've done, the accomplishments you have. And the facts of your life will stand on their own in your application. They'll be there. You don't have to retell them.
It's a great point.
Periodically, students will say to me, I know I can compete at XYZ school because I have the right scores, I have the right GPA. I know I can compete there, but I don't know what will set me apart from other candidates. I don't know that I can get in. And my response is this: well, you're looking in the wrong place. If you're looking for that thing that's going to set you apart and you're looking at the facts and the numbers, that puts you into the competition. But it's your ability to look inwardly at who you are, what you want to accomplish, the things we just talked about, the invisible you, if you will, the parts of you that aren't going to be seen easily in the application. Otherwise, it's your ability to connect with that invisible you, rather than the what, when, and where of your life. It will be the how and why of your life. it's the ability to do that that will make the greatest difference in the way you present an application. So
Sure.
let's take a look then at choosing a topic. The objective is to reveal something about your life experience that won't be found anywhere else in the application. What it all boils down to is this: if what you're doing with your essay is a reiteration of your extracurricular activities, it's worthless. If it's retelling things that I already know, it's worthless.
Mm-hmm.
That carefully. Reveal something about your life experience that won't be found anywhere else in the application. And that's not easy. If you're 17 years old, it's not easy to reflect like that and to understand how the things that have gone on in your life, either very directly and personally or in the world around you, have affected you. But this is something that you need to be focused on as you think about the message you want to tell. There are a lot of things that have affected your perspective in life.
Yeah, and it sounds like that would require a lot of self-discovery. And I don't know if that's something that we're used to doing, especially at the age of 17. So where would you recommend that they start with something like that in order to pick a great topic?
Well, we're going to get into that in just a moment, but I would suggest that the very first thing that students need to understand, even before the topic, is the fact that good writing, good communicating is not an event. It's not something that you can plan to do on some Saturday afternoon. I mean, and that's why a lot of young people think about a college application and a college essay. I have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and next weekend's going to be my weekend. I'm going to knock out that essay. It'll be done, and I can get that behind me. No, good writing is going to require a lot of steps, and I think that it might be appropriate here to kind of reveal what those steps might be. If you want to be an effective writer, an effective communicator, consider this 5-part process. It begins with reflection. It begins with thinking about who you are. Again, look inward, not outward, but inward. One of the exercises that I do with students sometimes is I ask them to talk about themselves. How would your teachers describe you as a student? How would your peers describe you? How would your parents describe you? How would you describe yourself? And all of a sudden they realize that there are a lot of different ways that they might be seen in the world. I ask them to talk about their awareness of different aspects of the world around them and how they engage in things spiritual, things political, things social. And I ask them to rate themselves on a scale of 10 to 1 in terms of that awareness and that critical engagement. And then 10 being highly engaged, 1 being not at all, and then to explain themselves, which is really interesting because it's at that point that they begin to make some critical distinctions about how they do find themselves in the world. So the reflective piece is really important because just like with the young man I just mentioned, the reflection may turn some things up that may not have been on your radar right off the start. Once you then have come up with some ideas, you need to conceptualize these ideas. In other words, you have an idea of a sense of what the message is you want to convey, but now you have to figure out how you want to convey it. Is there a story? Is there a metaphor that you can use to get this thing started? And I've had students use different types of literary concepts to present themselves, ranging from slam poetry to dramatic readings or writing. One time, speaking of the slam poetry, a girl read to me the poem that she'd written, and I said to her, that's amazing. And I said, what you need to do is record it, so that you not only send it in as something written, but send them your recording, because your interpretation of what you've written is really powerful. So that conceptualization can go in a lot of different directions with regard to how you present the idea. Now once the concept has become clearer for you, then you need the draft. You need to start writing. And this is, I think we have a little typo there, so that should be drafting rather than crafting. But at any rate, you want to start putting thoughts on paper, or these days you want to start a document. Start typing, exactly. And, that would be, when I say start typing, I don't mean start writing your essay. You might want to write thoughts, collect paragraphs, create a storyline, and see how things start to fit together. It's very interesting to me that when a student presents to me a draft of an essay, there are a lot of good parts to it, but sometimes they're misplaced, and we end up moving paragraphs around and ideas around. That's part of what the drafting is doing. It's not a matter of arriving at the perfect solution the first time. It's a matter of just pulling things together to see what you have, and then you begin to knit it together into a more or a stronger communication of who you are. Once you have a good draft, then you start to edit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and this is a really important piece, because one of the bits of advice, and we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, that I give to students is when you start to draft, don't worry about word count. And that's something that drives kids nuts, drives me nuts when I write, because a lot of times I know I want to write an 800 or 1,000 word essay, and you start to write and you check your word count. How far am I along? Gosh, I'm only at 250 words. I need to write more. You check again and you're at 475. Is that all? And all of a sudden, the word count becomes sort of an artificial monitor on your ability to be creative. So with the drafting, you need to get all of it out there. And for a college essay that might be 650 words at the end, you might have an initial draft that's 1,500 words, and that's okay because it's a draft. Then you edit. Then you go back and look at it critically, and try to determine, am I saying things the way I want to? What's essential to my presentation? Are there words I can take out? Are there paragraphs I can take out? A good editor is going to actually have fun with this process. I know that when I sit down with students to look at drafts that are much longer than needed, I can sense in the student a sense of despair. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I've got 1,200 words and I only need 650. And I'm just kind of giddy inside, because I know as we talk through this, we can find the words, and it becomes a game, really, to look for opportunities to tighten things up. And it's in that editing process that the essay really starts to take shape. And finally, once it's well edited, a lot of times students will get to the 650 words and they'll think, wow, okay, I'm there now. I can put this away. If you really want to make a good essay, great. There's some additional polishing that you want to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But there are some strategies to follow that can take a really good essay and make it a special essay. And that's where you want to be with your essay. You want it to be something that pops, something that lingers in the mind of the reader for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So what you're basically saying is that you have to put a ton of thought into the messages you want to convey, and it isn't just that event on a Saturday afternoon to just write things down on a piece of paper.
No, it's not. And I think that a lot of times students expect that there's going to be that magical moment when everything becomes crystal clear and bam, you can write it. And maybe that happens. Maybe you do have that moment where things just kind of materialize in your mind, and you write it down and you think you're all set. But the reality is that if you really care about doing a good job with this essay, you need to work with it. And it's the reflection, though, is important. If you have not given a lot of deep reflection to this essay before you even start with the conceptualization, you're going to have a lot of frustration. And so I think that it makes sense to talk a little bit more about how that reflection can start. So what we need to do here is kind of dig inside of who you are a little bit more. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some reflective conversations that you might have with a parent, with a friend, with me, however you like to approach it, that can give you greater insight here. For example, what do you care about most in life and why? Now, when students see that, it causes them to pause, because they're thinking, what do I care about most in life? Well, my family, my friends, doing well. I mean, the important question here is the why, because you can pretty easily or quickly come upon the object of your affection. What do you care about? But it's the why that's really important. And when you get to an understanding of the why, okay, it's your family. Well, why is your family important to you? Well, they take care of me. I take care of them. Well, tell me a little bit more about that dynamic. What are the expectations for you at home? Are you expecting more of yourself? Do people expect more of you? Why is that? And we keep going back to the why. Another question that I think that is a good one to use is choose a word that would best describe you. And why do you choose that word? And I think that students have fun with this because they like to come up with some crazy words and some thoughtful words. The next question that might be asked is, if you could interview anyone in the world, who would it be? And of course, why? This one can be very emotional. The answer in itself is the beginning point of the conversation, because the why begins to draw out more of the critical thinking part of that person. And another, I think, fun reflective experience would be describe a revelation or an aha moment you experienced. How did it change your perspective? And there are a lot of times in life when we have experiences that are unexpected, things that shake us, change us, have us see things differently. And what are those moments? What's going on in the moment? How are you feeling in the moment? How is it that perspective did change? And I think the conversations that emerge from these questions, when I've had them with students, can last anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. And the more we dig, the more there's there. And I think that if students really want to get at the core of who they are and find compelling stories to tell, that engaging in this kind of conversation and reflection is an important place to start.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're encouraging them to really do a deep dive on the core of who they are.
Well, that's right. And it's really important in the admission process to think about and focus on authenticity. A lot of times when you write about the things of your life, the things that happen, when you have a resume narrative or a travelogue, you're really not providing much depth of understanding about who you are. Admission officers want to see authenticity. They want to get at the real you. So, when we brainstorm in this manner, we're trying to in effect make you vulnerable. And that's what happens sometimes with students. They feel like, well, I can't say that, can I? Sure, why not? The thing here is you have to be willing to kind of go to places in your life experience that you might not have thought possible, and deal with them candidly, deal with them authentically. My very strong feeling is that your ability to make yourself vulnerable in this process is what makes you strong and what makes your message strong.
Sure.
Once you've done that, then the next step is to conceptualize or imagine how this messaging can be conveyed. In effect, the essay becomes a vehicle for carrying and then delivering your message. The first thing you want to do is think about connecting the dots. How can this essay complement other messaging elements of the application? Remember, we talked about holistic admissions. Some of the other messaging elements include letters of recommendation from teachers and counselors. They're providing a subjective orientation to you, but also the interview when possible. So how is this information going to come together with that other subjective information to help bring greater understanding to the facts then of your application? So connecting the dots in a thematically cohesive manner is really, really important here. The next thing I want to talk about is, I think, really central to my own philosophy about essay writing. You need to think about the essay as your art. What sort of impression you want to convey? Artists are always trying to create impressions. They're not trying to get grades, they're trying to create impressions. So with this essay, what do you want people to think about you or think of you? But when I would take this a step further to say, when you consider your essay as your art, consider also that art is in the eye of the beholder. So you can make it whatever you want. You can be creative. You can go in directions with this essay that you might not be able to go with an academic essay. And this is where I try to help kids understand they can break the conventions of the classroom. So often students are introduced to a college essay through a high school English class, where one of the assignments is to, write a draft of your college essay. Well, that's a nice exercise, but it's not a terribly meaningful exercise, because you're doing so within the context of an academic environment and all the rules of the academic environment. When you treat the essay as your art, all the rules are gone, because you're making your own. You're making your own rules with regard to what this can look like. So as long as you're authentic and you're consistent in the way you apply your own rules with the essay, you can develop a pretty impressive piece. So this part of the conceptualization is important. And then finally, how do you want to tell the story? As I suggested earlier, dramatic revelations, conversational narratives, metaphors, and even poetry can be really important and viable options here. Don't feel like you need to fit a certain mold. You create your own mold in the conceptualization of this essay.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up, the rules of either an English class or a history class, because when I think of, and I know that when I thought of an essay in high school, my mind immediately went to like the 5-paragraph essay or whatever structure that was taught to us at that particular time. And I think that this is definitely something that is, going down a different path, but it can be hard for students to kind of break that mold, because they're so conditioned to think that way. So these are all great points. Like, there's so much more creative freedom in the way that they represent themselves through this written form.
Well, absolutely. And the more an essay seems to conform to what the writer seems to think the reader wants to see, that gets a little convoluted, the less effective it becomes. In other words, there are students who spend more time trying to imagine what the dean wants to see than actually trying to create a statement for herself. And I think that when you become tied up in trying to please other people, or doing things that you think will please other people, that's when you lose the authenticity. So absolutely, you want to make sure that you let this thing flow. And then if it starts to look like an essay that you've written for an English class, that's kind of like the kiss of death with college essays. It just sits there. It doesn't do much. So once you get the creative juices flowing, you start to collect information, collect ideas, organize thoughts. Now you start to put yourself on the path to a really good essay. So let's take a look at some of the tips for getting started. Getting started. I'm not talking about finishing the essay right now, but talk about drafting and getting started with the drafting. So collect those ideas. You're still early in the process. Keep a journal. Every day or every couple of days, try to make an entry of 100 to 200 words in a journal, just about what you're thinking at the moment, what's going on in the world, what bothers you, what makes you happy, what gives you joy. But keep this journal for a period of, a month, 6 weeks, and see what kind of themes begin to emerge here. And maybe you can play off of some of those themes then in developing your essay. One of the things that I have found is that a lot of my most creative ideas come to mind as I'm trying to drift off into sleep. So I try to keep a pad and a pencil by my bedside so that I can roll over and write down a couple of words, a couple of thoughts. I'm not trying to write an essay as I'm trying to fall asleep, but I want to at least record the words or thoughts so that when I wake up in the morning, I can go back to them and start to expand upon them further. So this notion that you need to write a fully formed essay from the beginning is wrong. Collect ideas, make notes. You'll find that some of your inspiration for ideas come at the most unexpected times, and that's why you want to be ready to write some things down when you can. Be prepared. Number 2, be prepared for an iterative process. again, if you're thinking that this is going to be a one-time and done essay, you're going to be frustrated. So iterative means that you're going to draft, redraft, edit, rewrite, etc. The perfect draft is not likely to appear in the first draft. If that happens, you're extraordinarily lucky. Number three, you don't want to worry about the word count. As I suggested before, let your essay grow organically. So don't worry about the word count. Just let it go. We'll fix that later. Trust your voice is the next one. Don't try to be something or someone you're not. Be who you are. Be creative with who you are. Be authentic. Again, admission officers want to see the real you, the authenticity of what you have to say. As you begin to draft, be careful not to tell. You want to reveal, not tell. A lot of times when I look at essays for the first time, I see a lot of I statements that are telling me the facts, and it's a real easy edit for me to say, how can you retell this story so that you're creating an impression from me. You're revealing something. You want to give me insights. The telling loses me. The revealing engages me. Next up is you might want to use stories or metaphors to tell your story. And we'll talk about organizationally how this essay might look. But sometimes that metaphor or that the story can be used to hook the reader at the very outset of the essay. Consider using conversational narrative to deliver key messages. You may find that there was a debate, an argument, a conversation that with somebody else, back and forth, literally, that helps to create the drama of the moment that can start an essay. So you want to consider using that, consider the conversational narrative to deliver key messages. Sometimes when I say this, I suggest this to students, they'll say, well, can I really do that? Yep, you can. This is your art. This is your opportunity to be creative in conveying ideas. And then finally, you don't want to be distracted by essays others have written. This, I think, is a really important observation because there are a ton of essays out there. In other words, essays that have been written. You can find them on the internet. You can find them in books. 100 best essays written by Ivy League graduates. If you have those books, burn them because they cannot help you. Those essays have been written, submitted. They will only add to the paralysis that you feel by this analysis. Please believe me when I say this, the true genius for your essay will be found in you, not in anyone or anything else. It will be found in you. So, on the one hand, you might find it entertaining to read things that were written by other people, but don't try to emulate them. Don't try to be them. Be yourself. And finally, a lot of times students are concerned about topics to avoid. And you hear about death and divorce. Don't write about that. You hear about, don't write about a pet. Don't write about your dearly departed. I disagree. I don't believe there are topics to avoid. And this year, people will say, well, don't write about coronavirus. Don't write about COVID-19. Why? Well, everybody's writing about that. I disagree. What you want to do is find your story within the topic. And the key thing is this: if your story can be presented in a uniquely personal fashion, in a manner that only you can tell it, then it's a very effective and compelling story. It's when the story is a coronavirus story from the surface, and it's all about, well, this year didn't go the way I wanted it to because we were in and out of class, then we had to finish virtually, and we had to shelter in place. All of a sudden, you're just telling me facts that I already know. And that's not going to be terrible.
Really, it's not personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it occurred to me. Here's a possible topic line for or approach to a coronavirus. I've learned recently of young people, high school seniors, whose performance has been dramatically affected by the fact that they are regarded as "quote unquote" essential workers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about that. The young person who's an essential worker at a grocery store, at a fast food place in the era of coronavirus probably only thinks about that as a pain. I got to do it. but doesn't stop to think about how that commitment as an essential worker has a rippling effect on your personal life, your academic life, the way you imagine your future. And all of a sudden now that young person has a pretty unique perspective on the coronavirus. So I don't believe there are topics to avoid. There are approaches to avoid, but not topics to avoid, as long as you can make the presentation an intensely personal presentation.
Yeah, and based on all of what you just outlined here, it really sounds like this could take a while. This is not a short process to go through.
If done well, you're correct. Some of the best essays that I've read were the product of drafting efforts that started in June at the end of the junior year and didn't finish until the middle of September, the start of the senior year. A
Wow.
really good essay cannot be rushed. It just needs to marinate at times. I will talk about it a little bit later, but you'll notice I use the word time in here too. Time is one of the best editorial tools that you have at your disposal, and it is free. Time gives you perspective. Time allows you as the writer to step back from what you've created and to look at it critically and thoughtfully and to fix it and to make it better. So you're absolutely right. This is not something that can be rushed. So let's take a look at, once you've gotten things going, now you've got a draft. What do you do with that draft? Again, because you've got a lot of time on your hands, right? It's time to start shaping the essay, making it more of what you want. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the notion of organizing the messaging into three parts. And I don't mean three paragraphs, I mean three parts. The first part of your essay should be the hook. And the hook is sort of a compelling or dramatic introduction that gets the reader's attention. It puts me, the reader, in the moment of whatever's happening in your life that you want to talk about, and helps to give me a sense of the emotion that you're feeling as that moment is developing. That hook can be 100 words. 70, and there's no fast and furious rule on this, but it could be 75 to 100 words. Then the second part of the essay will be the backstory. Once you've hooked me, once you've gotten me interested in reading more, now the backstory provides a better understanding of what's going on. You provide more of an explanation. And when you think about some of the good books that you've read, many of the books, and if not chapters, start the same way. There's something at the outset that grabs your attention and draws you in. And then the better part of a chapter provides more of the backstory and helps to bring you up to steam in terms of what's going on. And then the last part of this essay will be the summary perspective that helps you to put things into, again, some perspective. What have you learned and how has the experience changed you? This can be a sort of a philosophical end note for you as well. But think about organizing your essay in this manner. Hook the reader, get me interested, get me excited, I want to know more. Provide then through the backstory, probably 400, 450 words of the backstory, give me a sense of what's really going on. And then the summary perspective doesn't have to be long. It could be anywhere from 50 to 100 words that pulls it all together. So this is the basic way of thinking about organizing the essay. Then, as you are going through the essay to shape it even further, remember that paragraphs can be your friends. Actually, I know you observed earlier that in an English class you're taught about the 5-paragraph essay. Yeah. This is not an English essay. Your essay for college can have as many paragraphs as you need. I would suggest the more the better, and there are two reasons for that. One, when admission officers look at essays that have big paragraphs, they look like big blocks of words. And you have to keep in mind that our eyes are moving very quickly to get through the application. Your application might have as many as 20 pages of data. And I have a limited amount of time to get through all this stuff. So I'm moving very quickly through this essay. And I get to the point where I say, wow, there's an essay a paragraph that just doesn't end. My eyes rebel. And I rather than kind of working through it, I just stop and I move on. So you want to create a sense of flow with your paragraphs. The rule of thumb here is this: whenever you change thoughts or ideas, change paragraphs. You can have a one sentence, a one line, or even a one word paragraph. Think about the creative aspect of this. You are creating your own drama, your own compelling argument here. You get to decide what it looks like. So paragraphs can be your friends. You can have 8, 10, 12 paragraphs in this essay. There is no limit. Just remember, the basic rule, though, is that whenever you change thoughts or ideas, change paragraphs. It makes it easier for the reader to read it and digest it, and it creates a flow. Now the paragraphing becomes part of the creative interpretation of the essay. The next thing up, you want to look for opportunities to simplify. Now we're looking at a draft that's in pretty good shape, but still might be a little long on words. How do you simplify? You want to look for unneeded thoughts and words, which would be the next thing we're going to talk about. You want to look for, well, quite simply, adverbs are typically overused. Because a lot of times students want to, not quite to the dangling prepositions yet, but the adverbs are a little bit overused because we want to, students want to make an impression that they can be flowery with their language. Ask yourself, is that essential? Do I really need it? The dangling preposition, since it's up there right now, is really important. You should never end a sentence with the word to, unto, before, about, from. When you allow that to happen, when you have a dangling preposition at the end of a sentence, you're saying to the reader, you don't understand the rules of grammar. So you want to be very sensitive to how you organize your thoughts that way. So in terms of simplifying, I want to go back to that thought very briefly here. As you look at a sentence, ask yourself, is it needed there? Do I need to have that phrase? Can I eliminate the phrase? I'm not talking about eliminating whole paragraphs here, but just look at the parts of a sentence that may not be necessary. A lot of I statements can be changed and to simplify the presentation as well. Again, the unneeded thoughts and words, conjunctions are often unnecessary. And, but, however, try punctuation, a period. Be careful about starting a sentence with the word but or however, because that introduces a negative perspective, and you may not intend for that to be a negative perspective. So again, the wordsmithing that you engage in here can be very important in polishing this essay. Use punctuation to lend emphasis to key points. Again, this is the creative part. In an English essay, you wouldn't think of using bold. You wouldn't think about using italics or ellipses. You wouldn't use exclamation marks. This is not an English paper, so you can use all of those things. One of my favorites is a long dash to add emphasis to a particular point that you're trying to make. So you, in the course of writing a sentence, there might be a place where you'd normally put a comma to separate the thoughts. The long dash does the same thing, but it really brings to the attention of the reader that this is something that's important for you. So be creative in the way you use punctuation in lending the emphasis to key points. Don't tell colleges things they already know about themselves. This relates more to the supplemental essays. They're not trying to determine whether you know that they've got a great faculty, a beautiful campus, and all that sort of stuff. They know that stuff. What colleges are looking for in the supplemental essays is evidence that you see the synergy. And please, if you don't know what that word's all about, synergy, it's the connectedness between yourself, your ideas, your goals, your sense of purpose, and what they have to offer. So in the supplemental essays, you need to be very careful that you are projecting yourself and your sense of purpose rather than trying to make them feel good about the fact that you want to be on their campus because they're ranked #1. Or I'm going to play on this just a little bit further. Students who will be writing an essay in response to New York University or Columbia University, and why do you want to come here? And they start off by saying, I'm a city person, or I love New York. Wrong. You're not applying to the city. You're not applying to New York City. You're applying to the institution. And you want to make sure that you're focused on how what you want and what you want to achieve is connected to the institution. People want to go to Boston. Well, that's nice, but you better make sure that if you're applying to a college or university in the Boston area, you're speaking to the synergy that you see between yourself and that place, not the city. So you don't want to tell colleges things they know about themselves. And then when you have a completed draft in hand, then you focus on the word count. Notice where this comes in the order of things. The word count isn't early in the process, it's late in the process. And as we begin to focus on the word count and work this down, all the other tips about the shaping and editing help us then in bringing that word count into line. But I have yet to encounter an essay that is not manageable within the word count. It may take a little time to work it out, but in bringing that word count down from whatever it is to 650, you make your essay better. You will make it better. And then give yourself time to edit at least 3 or 4 times over a period of weeks or months. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of time here. If you try to do this in a short period of time, if you try to do this on a weekend or even in a week, you give yourself a very limited amount of time to sit back and reflect and analyze what you've done. 3 or 4 times, actually probably be 8 or 10 times over a period of weeks or months. That's when you make a really good essay great.
Wow, this is this is a lot of work, and I can see why having a plan and being organized about it is a critical part of this process. But is this wrapping it up, or is there anything else that we may have to do? Because I have a feeling there's still a few things here.
Well, there could be, and the approach I take with a student is this: if your main objective is to present an essay that will satisfy the requirement, at this point you're fine. But if you want this essay to become a factor that helps get you in, there's more to do. So if you want to make a good essay great, I would like to suggest 2 additional strategies. One, and this is kind of simple, read it out loud. Better yet, have someone else read it out loud to you. When you try to proofread something that you have written, when you try to proofread it quietly to yourself, your brain will play tricks with you. Your brain will say that is an if. It's not. Your brain will say that there's only one and in that sentence, but it does say and. I think the optimal thing here is to have someone else read it to you. And I often do this with students. I will read to them their draft. And at the end of each paragraph, we'll stop and we'll reflect. Invariably, they'll say, hold on a second, that's not what I want to say. We need to fix a word there. When you hear things as they are written, you gain a different perspective on them and you understand better how you want to make your point. So even though you may think you're done, reading that out loud or having someone read it out loud to you gives you the opportunity to refine your presentation. And then the next piece, and this is when students don't always like to hear me say, is try to reduce the word count by 10%. And this could seem torturous because you've just spent hours, days, weeks, months trying to make this essay really, really good, and you've gotten it down to 650 words, and now Peter's saying, try to reduce it by another 10%. If you commit yourself to that activity, if you commit yourself to the discipline of trying to reduce the word count by 10%, you will force yourself to examine every word, every thought, idea, every punctuation. And even if you don't get to 10%, but you make an honest effort trying, you will make your essay much better. It's that risk that you take to really push it further, pushing it beyond good to great, that can indeed make it a great essay. And the essays that I've seen that have gone on to help students find success are the result of those kinds of exercises.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like that could be a big challenge for students. As you mentioned, your word count has already been brought down substantially. But assuming that students are attentive to this outline, what are some potential pitfalls that they might run into?
Well, it's a good question. And I think the very first one is procrastination, because even though students are attentive to the outline, they may not be committed to it. They know they need to do it, but they've tell themselves, I can wait until next week to start. I can wait until the mood hits me right. Well, having the right inspiration, the right mood is important, but procrastination can be a big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to keep putting off. And I think all of us probably feel this way, that the longer we put things off, the harder it is to get involved in a meaningful way. As I said earlier, the best editorial tool that students have at their disposal is time. And the more they procrastinate, the more they limit their access to that time. So, I would suggest that the best thing to do is to get started as soon as you can. There are two other enemies of the essay writers that I'd like to just talk about briefly. The first is this: the words "I can't." And again, this is something I hear fairly often early in the process from students who are convinced that there's nothing in the world that can make a difference here. I'm not good enough. They won't want me. I can't. Well, when you live in the world of I can't, you won't. You have to get past that notion. You have to believe that you can, and when you can, you will. So it's a matter of attitude. You need to have a positive, open, forward-thinking attitude, and especially if what you're trying to do with your college essay is born out of a sense of purpose, then you know you can, and not only you can, but you must. So believe in yourself here with the I can. The other enemy of the essay writers, it's good enough. We get to a point in the drafting, the editing process, there's a fatigue factor that sets in. And students will often push back and they'll say, hey, I got it down to 650 words. It's good enough. I don't need to do anything more. Do you really want good enough to represent you in the college admission process? I can tell you now that admission officers are really good at discerning good enough, and good enough doesn't cut it. Good enough might satisfy a requirement, but it will not be what gets you in. As one student said to me after hearing me talk once, she said, one of the things I've learned here is that good enough is never enough. If you're never quite satisfied with what you put together, then you're on the right track. But it's when you feel like it's time to kind of check out of this because it's good enough, that's when you're going to run into trouble. So if you care about doing a good job, you got to set the bar high, do your best, and then hope for the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that actually wraps up the main part of our presentation here, Peter. I want to thank you for all of these really great tips and the insight behind why you should be approaching the essay this way. And it looks like we have time for one question. And this is something that came up a little bit in the dialogue earlier, but somebody wants to know more about supplemental essays. And a lot of colleges ask for them, but how is the process different for them than what you're describing here?
Well, I would argue that especially at selective institutions, highly selective institutions, the supplemental essay prompts are probably more important than anything else, more important than the main essay. Because again, those admission officers are, I'm going to use this word again, are trying to discern your understanding of self, your understanding of compatibility with the institution, your sense of purpose. They're trying to figure out, is this somebody who's really thought a lot about why this place fits for her? Mm-hmm. And if you are writing a supplemental essay because you're excited about a school, it's a highly ranked school, it's got the major that I want, it's located wherever, got amazing faculty, you're not telling them anything. And one of the things, and we talked about this in our last interview, we talked about talking with professors in pursuing a greater understanding of your own sense of purpose and the ability of that institution to fulfill your sense of purpose. That's what they want to see here. They want to see students who have landed at that particular place with an application because they believe that that institution in material ways, not reputational ways, but in material ways, can help her achieve her goals.
Got it. Absolutely. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today to give us all of these tips about the essay. And
My pleasure.
it's my understanding that, you are more than happy to help support students and coach them through this process. And we want to let all of our attendees and audience know that this is available to them. So if you are interested in getting some help with your college essay, you can absolutely reach out to Peter. His contact information is reflected here. But Peter, is there anything else that you would want to let our audience know related to the help that you can provide with this part of their application?
Sure. I would just add that, I'm happy to help students with their application preparation, particularly their essays. It's a fee-based process, but one of the things that I will not do is I will not write the essay for the student. I will not provide any guarantee or assurance of admission to a particular school, but what I will guarantee is that I will help the student put herself in the best position possible to compete for admission at places that make sense. So, if that sort of approach is one that's appealing to students and to parents, I think we could have a good working relationship.
Great, great. All right, well, that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you again, Peter, for joining us. And I am sure we will have you back in the near future to talk about many other topics that's been the college admissions process. So thank you for joining us today, and we will talk to you soon.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Look forward to the next time.